Good day. My name is Tiffany Willis-Gilmore, and I am very excited to introduce and present to you some individuals that are going to serve on our as panelists today on the topic of quote unquote black on black crime. I am representing SOW Network, which stands for Signature on the World. Our mission is to give people a voice through various outlets. So first we have Thomas B. Donaldson, Esquire. He hails from Harlem, New York. He was raised in the South Bronx and moved to Liberty City, and he's now back in Harlem with his family doing some phenomenal things. And he also works in the area of various types of law, but criminal law as well. Secondly, we have Tyrone Hill Sr., who just mentioned to me that he is a proud grandfather, so I want to put that out there. But in addition to that, he is one who is not only a property owner, he's one who has completed his studies for his doctorate degree at Florida International, and he also serves on the National Alumni Association of Florida Memorial College. So we want to welcome you as well, Tyrone. Next, we have Kirk D. Shelton, who hails from Akron, Ohio, who is also quite phenomenal. He's an artist, he's a multi-unit property owner, and he is the founder of Gray Space Core, which is an internet marketing company in Ohio. So good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So there's a lot going on right now. That's just very obvious with the protests. And most of what we hear deals with the situation about police brutality. But on the flip side of that, you have individuals who are concerned about something called black on black crime. And they're saying that, yeah, we should be upset about what's happening to Black people in regards to them being at the hands of police officers or dying at the hands of police officers. But what about the fact that many, and this is what people say, many of you are killing each other, thereby creating this black on black crime and these high statistics. So I know that some people have asserted, Thomas, that there's no such thing as black on black crime. And I wanted to know if you could possibly explain that to us.
Sure, and good evening again. Correct. You're correct. There is no such thing as black on black crime. That's a misnomer, and in fact, it is a political conundrum used by the far right against people on the left or anyone else who's interested in justice. The problem is this: crime is crime, and for many decades, statistics have borne out the fact that crime is a phenomenon of opportunity, and the Department of Justice statistics always show repeatedly, year after year, that criminals commit crimes among people who are near them. So, for facts, 90% of Black victims of crime have the perpetrators are actually Black people. That is true. However, the rate is 86% for white people also. Additionally, most criminals who are actually committing the violent type of crimes are committing those crimes against people that they actually know. These are people that are within their circle or within their familiarity. This is not an issue of race at all whatsoever. More importantly, though, the problem with the misnomer of black on black crime is that in actuality, what you're doing is you are creating an additional victimization of the victims. If you look at it, if you think about the prevalence of criminal activity and particularly of violent crime, and you talk about how it is so of significance today, the actual victims of these crimes are Black people. And most of these people are people in very deplorable circumstances in neighborhoods where not only is the crime rate high, but the poverty rate is high, and every other social economic indicator is as such. So in actuality, when we talk about black on black crime, what we're doing is recreating the situation and circumstance of actually victimizing these people again. There's no such thing as black on black crime. People commit crime with regard to their circumstance and the people within their sphere.
Okay. Did anyone have something they wanted to add to that?
Yes, of course. I concur with Thomas's assessment. And I would like to add that I was studying in a small town in Florida with two major universities. I will leave them nameless. One university was of color and the other one was a PWI, predominantly white institution. And I would use the case of Saturday afternoons at football games, where at the HBCU, there was virtually no crime. It was all about partying and, see who can get into the game, sneak into the game, that type of thing. But just 2 miles away, the other institution, the PWI, had multiple fights every single game. And those statistics went unreported. And the reason why they had a lot of fights is there's more beer drinking at a PWI activities than there traditionally are at HBCUs. And when we do drink at HBCU, it's usually more of a controlled setting of where you can control yourself, and you have someone that kind of lays out parameters for you to stay within. If you get outside of those parameters, if too drunk, your friend's going to try to bring you back in. Whereas a PWI, everyone's just rowdy and knocking each other's teeth out. And I witnessed that for 3 years. And I would look at the dailies and both printed and electronic press, and they would report if someone got their car burglarized at the HBCU's game and never report the multiple fights going on at the PWI. So again, I guess, statistics go this way. You can mend and shape them to what you want them to be. And because us of color are not predominantly in the news cycles, it is the people, the Caucasians who report the news, and they report what they want to see or what they want out there. And I witnessed that firsthand. And I often wonder how come journalists are so imbalanced at times. But yeah, there's black on black crime, there's crime everywhere. I mean, within the Indian culture, certain cultures, take Indian, for example, or husband can beat his wife and actually kill her or even the daughters, if they disgrace the family's names. It's done culturally with them, and it's accepted in their circles. And when they migrate to America, they bring that same thing with them, and then they get caught sometimes because if it's reported, but it's kept hush hush. And I just use that as an example. Within many of these migrant communities, they keep their mouth shut, and they commit their own crimes, etc. But yeah, there's black on black, there's crime everywhere. But it's used towards us to demonize and demagogue our communities.
Did you want to add anything, Kirk?
I mean, I would agree with that stance if you look at it the way that Tyrone spelled it out there. I mean, I agree with both of these gentlemen that crime is intra-racial. Okay, like Tyrone said, of course there's black on black crime, just like there's Hispanic on Hispanic crime, Asian on Asian crime, and white on white crime. However, our rate of crime is disproportionate if we put it up against, let's say, the Asian community. Our crime rate is much higher. But I think the argument that we should be having, or the discussion that we should be having, is why is this? Okay, I think the main problem is that we have these issues are lack of policing, high rates of poverty, which I think that Thomas had mentioned, and displaced anger is a huge problem in our community. So yeah, I'm going to come from the stance of, yes, logically there is black on black crime, just like there's, the other races have crime as well. But that's the sense that I'm coming from.
If I may, the major part of the departure I have is this, and this is why I would never use I don't use the phrase black on black crime, because if you want to look at it statistically, criminal behavior is diametrically related specifically, it's pinpoint detail specific to rates of poverty in this country. So if you remember a few decades ago when the Clinton administration was in force, they bragged vociferously about the fact that crime rates had dropped significantly. And that was not necessarily due to any type of legislation, nor was it due to any particular programs. It was due to the economic viewpoint of the communities of color. When people had jobs, when the community had significant support, when there was significant amount of activity that was outside of the criminal sphere, crime went down. Now, when you have a circumstance where people feel like there's nothing to lose, and when they have to survive, things happen. You have the perpetuation of the drug culture, you have people within homes, and you have all the factions that happen in every community with regard to violence against women, violence against children, of medicating the whole 9 yards. So if you look at it purely from a statistical point of view, it's clearly an economic issue, nothing else.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, and it makes sense, and I like how everybody has been able to add to that. How do we explain the 102 deaths, or not deaths, or the victims in Chicago over the weekend? Or Liberty City last weekend had a graduation party, and someone came and shot up the party. Are we to assume that poverty causes those type of outbursts? Or is it because we're in the middle of a pandemic and the people just don't have anything to keep them busy?
I would never say that. Sorry,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Thomas, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but I was going to say, I would never claim that poverty is the cause of it, but I'm saying poverty is the bedrock foundation of it. But if you look at why we're so perpetually within the news for crime, it's about a discussion people don't want to have, and that's systemic racism. I'm not saying that the Klan comes and makes us create crime. I'm not saying because we were enslaved for 100 years ago, but if you really honestly look at it, the type of behavior you described, Tiffany, with regard to gang shootings and people coming up shooting at parties and having a weekend with scores of people are shot and killed and maimed, the problem is this. In these circumstances, there are no community supports. The institutions have devolved themselves. Our schools have developed to a point where they are either become babysitters or they're acting as if they're probation officers, and very little is done inside the schools to learn. We often have a circumstance where we have children having children. And so if you have a 17-year-old who has 2 children, he or she cannot possibly teach those 2 young people what type of culture and what type of standards and perspectives to have in life. And one final thing, if the home structure itself is broken, you can't expect anyone to abide by the norms of society, and the primary norm of society is law. So if you think about all those things, it's kind of obvious why you would have such destruction in our community. If the pervasive economic system is broken, if the social and institutional structure is broken, you have this circumstance. However, one last thing, if you think about it, every other subgroup in this nation has gone through the similar concoction of events. Every single one. The problem is this: because of our facial, because of our skin color, because of our abnormalities, it's obvious that we've been blacklisted, so to speak. We can't get over the bump. If you're Irish, you've gone through that period of time, you're normalized and you're just quote American. If you're Italian, the same thing. We get marginalized, we get ghettoed, we're in the communities that we've been put into with those circumstances with nothing there. It's obvious what's gonna happen. Despair is that way in America, it's in Brazil, it's in every developed country where you have significant ghettos. Same thing all over the place.
Oh, let me just say this, let me interject this, Thomas. I hear what you're saying, But I would have to respectfully disagree on some of the things that you just said. You mentioned the Irish, okay? And we'll just use them as an example when they came here during the early 1900s. The difference between them and us is they policed their own neighborhoods. Same with the Italians. The crime was going on, but they kept it at a particular level, and they policed themselves. We're not policing ourselves to that degree. Would you agree to that?
I would agree that the same type of policing that you're talking about is not present today, but there are reasons for that. One of which is that we don't own our communities. It's very difficult to police something for which you have no control over. We have basically become a occupied territory. When the police come into our territory, they're not coming to protect. They're coming to control. They're coming in to save other people from our behavior.
Yes and no. Let me use the example of the favelas in Brazil. Okay. You know, those areas could be extremely violent at times. However, the gangsters, so to speak, in the favelas, they run things, and if anything goes down, they know about it. Do you understand what I'm saying? The police are afraid to go up in there because they know the gangsters run things up there, and the gangsters keep things safe unless something goes down between gang versus gang. You know, right. The mother with child doesn't have to worry about being robbed or something like that, or home being broken into or raped or whatever, you know, because the gangster is keeping control of things. And if something goes down like that, you know, the streets are going to talk, and those gangsters are going to handle that particular situation because they're not going to have that going on up in that hood. We could be doing the same thing, but we're not. There was a time in this country, as a Black community, we didn't own things then, you know, per se, our own communities per se. However, we still we held down what we did own or rent or whatever you wanted to call it. We held it down, and we're not doing that anymore. But I think with all that's happening now, I think we're going to see a change in all of that. The mind state of our youth is it's incredible. You know, I think that's going to take a turn for the better, where people are going to start taking control of themselves and their own destiny. They're not going to ask the white man for a handout anymore. You know, they're going to start policing themselves. Black gun ownership is going to go up. You're going to see, I mean, you're seeing it already. You're seeing inner city farms because they're not going to worry about the white man feeding them, because you know there's a lot of ghettos. You have so-called food deserts. You can't even find a grocery store. That's gonna change because Black people are gonna start feeding themselves. You know, this is just what I see.
But Kirk, no, what you see is what I've seen, and I agree with you, except one thing. You said that when we did similar to what you're talking about with the Irish and policing their own, we didn't own anything we did back then. That's primarily pre-integration. You know, before the Civil Rights Movement, when we did not have the ability to flow into the outer community so much, when there was Jim Crow entrenching our neighborhoods, we didn't have it as much. However, at that time, the criminal element was still afoot in our neighborhoods as was anyone else. Remember, it's a bit older than us, but if you remember, we had that same control. You did have the people who controlled who did what in our neighborhood, and they would tell you particularly, you can't come over here and do X, Y, and Z. And they
I agree with that.
Right, but the problem was that you said that it's different because we didn't own anything at the time. But we did.
No. Wait a minute. I didn't say 100% that we didn't own anything, because I said some of us owned, some of us rented. Right. You know, but by and large, you know, a lot of us didn't always own. We may have rented, but we still policed ourselves.
Right. But when I say ownership, I don't mean just particularly and specifically exclusively about title ownership. I mean ownership to the extent that we did not have the same police presence in our neighborhoods and communities that we have now. Right now.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you.
Right now, the police force is primarily maintained to instill order to the extent that nothing happens within our neighborhood that leaks out into the greater neighborhood. And they come into our neighborhoods thinking they have to control the animals, so to speak. That's the mentality I often see. They don't come in to protect the people in our community who are victims of crimes. They come in to, quote unquote, control the animals. And if they came into our neighborhoods to protect, it'll be different. If we had the same type of, I guess, for lack of word, if we had the same autonomy as we once did, remember, a long time ago, they didn't give a damn what happened in our neighborhoods. The police often, you called them and you prayed they would come. You remember?
Right.
You prayed they would come. Now, they come in whether you want to or not. So the difference then was we had to police our neighborhoods. We did it ourselves. We had more ownership, whether it be title ownership or we had control over it. Right now, there's very little control over our neighborhoods at all.
Well, can I add?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tyrone. Go ahead,
Yes.
Tyrone.
You know, I want to elaborate on 2 or 3 points from you all's discussion that I was attentively listening to. Now, as an educator for 31 years, I learned a lot I've worked in 3 different school districts and 1 foreign district. And the common equation between all of those experiences that I've had is that it boils down to a mentality, but I'll come back to that point first. Lastly, I would like to make this point in that with George Floyd's situation and Reverend Al Sharpton preaching about letting up off our necks, let me use that as a common thread here. When there's a let up in the communities now regarding all this protest, and they want something to change. You got to get up off something so we can move a little further. Let's go back to slavery. When we were emancipated, there was a let up from the plantations. And I wouldn't say black folk, but suppressed people, when you let up and give them a degree of movement, they're going to assimilate to the first thing moving that they think is greater. In our case, we thought that it was better to straighten our hair. It started to look like white folks. And then we had during slavery, I've never read any accounts where a bright-skinned slave was different than a black-skinned, dark-skinned slave, until there was some let up, there was some freedom. And then we start to lay in place this class system of, you know how we call red girls, hey, red. And then, well, back in my day, we call her red bone. And if you dark skin, we call you a black bone. And we had a saying, black bones make you do wrong, but red bones make you leave home. We put a priority on red skin, lighter skinned persons. And that's with me. But prior to that, we went to straightening our hair. That's what Madam C.J. Walker did with her products. It was all about perming. And fellas had, all the big orchestra leaders, Cab Calloway, all of them, had wavy, straightened hair. And to this day, if your hair is nappy, we insist that you get a perm. If you want to insult a female, tell her she needs a touch-up or something along those lines. She's still offended to this day because we haven't accepted. We have started with the naturalness, but it's still not widely accepted. So a part of the let-up was that we thought white was better. And then when we integrated, because we did own everything, all our black doctors, we went to black schools. Then we opened up our law firms, black medical practices, etc. And we had it all within the communities. Florida A&M University had a whole hospital and a law school in the 50s and 60s to train just black lawyers. That's who Alcee Hastings is. He came out of Florida A&M law school. And that closed in 69. I can tell you why that closed, because I was in the legislature. Anyhow, now, when there was let up, we tend to gravitate toward the white community. We have this common thread in our community that we need to bounce off the white community to feel accepted. Don't say finna. You got to say, I'm getting ready to. We want to speak proper. Now, there's an essence in that you should speak the Queen's English, because the word door is door, D-O-O-R. That's how you learn in school. But in our communities, we say dough. I want to go to the store to get some more, so I'm open this door and I'm going to go. And so we put our own, what we call ebonics or slang. And then when you get a little educated, you divest yourself of that language and you start to speak properly to bounce off the white community. And we, to this day, still bouncing off, but I think the bouncing is going to reverberate back the other way. We're starting to separate because we're realizing we can stand our own. And that's a part of the let up that you see with these protests. They're demanding something different. From slavery, there was a different layer. And then we went into the roaring 20s and then the 40s and et cetera. We had the Tuskegee Airmen, a black squadron. They didn't fly with the white folks. They had to fly amongst themselves and did we know the history on that, and et cetera, et cetera. And our black schools were controlled by black teachers and administrators until integration. And then Florida State opened up, and then Boston U opened up, and then this person opened up. And now our children right now look at football signing day. They want to go to the U, and they want to go to all these schools who now rebranded their package to attract our persons of color and our poor HBCUs running the fifth and sixth and seventh string players into their programs via scholarship. But the better players wouldn't even look at HBCUs. So now, it's mentality. Now I said, let me package it this way. There's a such thing as being poor, and there's a such thing as being poor-minded. Crime, for me, and poverty does not have a correlation. It goes with mentality, temperament. Now, in our community as black males, I'm looking at the two of you, and you know somewhere along the way, you either got in the fight or you had to avoid a fight. But one thing you didn't want to look like as a male growing up is a weak male, because you're going to be preyed on. So we have to fight. We have to stand up real quickly, buddy. I got to get up. I got to get with you. So we got this mentality that we got to stand up. We can't resolve it verbally. We got to come to fisticuffs. That's our culture, which means then some of us might pick up a rock or stick, where others going to pull out their gun, because if you're closer to that gang world, you're going to start shooting. So that's our mentality. That's how our crime is perpetuated in our community. We believe we need to go for bad to be somebody. And if you're intelligent, and again, you fellas on here, I'm sure somewhere along the way, you've encountered young ladies who wouldn't even talk to you because you're too proper, you're too nerdy. They want a thug. And there's some songs that tell them a thug. TLC had a song, anyway. But so we in our culture, we have this dichotomy where we are, we're saying something here and something there, and we don't know what the hell we're saying all together. Excuse my language. But as an educator, I talk to students all the time. It doesn't matter if they're Hispanics, who they are. But if you fail in the school in these United States, one thing they recognize is the higher your education is, the more respect you have. If you come in with that to open up some doors or a lot of doors, even if you're a person of color. And then you add your diction to that, and you can stand toe to toe. And our parties are shake the sweat off your backside. But a party in the white culture, stand up, drink wine, and have a stale conversation. So you better come in with your stale conversation, telling you went diving in the Keys at John Penniman Park, and then you skied off the Alps in Switzerland, and they stand right up. They got respect for you because they understand you're a cultured person. And you probably done more than them. And my final point is, if you bounce off the white culture and you listen carefully, they're not that exposed. They stay in a small cluster, and a lot of them are extremely ignorant and unlearned. And they move it. They go to a restaurant. They find a fancy restaurant. They move in small circles, and they're not exposed as persons of color. If you actually pay attention to that, you will realize you've had more experiences, more flexibility in life than they have. You've gone more places. You can go in the hood and then go to a white restaurant where they ain't coming in the hood. So they can't tell you nothing there. And my final point is, working on my coursework at this doctorate degree, one of my professors produced a book for us for that term. And it was written by a sociologist out of London. And he came to America and he studied ghettos, black neighborhood projects. So my professor, this the only white Jewish guy, he was there holding this book up, and this guy is this and that, all the accolades you can throw at an author, and well respected. The first chapter, I ate him up, and the first thing I did is discredited the entire book. I got a B in the class. I should have got an A, but at least he dropped me to a B. I was thankful he didn't take me to an F because I sure shredded them the whole term. But let me tell you what I counted with. The sociologist went through the hoods of, let's say, Philadelphia, even here, Miami, LA, I can't remember them all. And he just drove through. And what he recorded visually is what he wrote on. But I counted with this. I said, when he passed through 62nd Street Park and Spring projects, or you go through Strawberry Hill, or every project has some kind of nickname throughout the US. What that sociologist didn't do is get out and talk to people. But I can guarantee you, for every 5 fellas you see standing on that corner at that store, there's 10 guys in the house, mama won't let them out. And them fellas studying. And you didn't get to speak to them. You didn't see them. A lot of us come out of depressed areas and depressed situations and forget sizing up if there was a father or not. Sometimes your mama was worse than your daddy, any old way, period. So now, he didn't talk to them to get a counterbalance. And that's how that was the tenor of my conversation, the entire entire term with this professor and his world famous sociologist who did this study. But that was the gist of my point. But I broke it down in so many different ways for them. You got girls, you might, if one you see pregnant, you got 5 in the house who can't come out. You do have goodness in those areas. And yeah, so it goes back to my point about journalists. It depends on who's reporting the statistics. Now, and I'm gonna swear I'll make this final point again. You all mentioned the Irish community and the Italians I heard earlier. You know, they have the mafia. Drive by, you all know John Gotti and them murder up all kind of people, Valentine's Day, this, that, Al Capone. And we have a drive-through at a party, and then it gets reported on the news. But backtrack just about 2 months ago, and there were 2 17-year-old girls murdered by Hispanics right here in Miami. The father of one of them, I think he lived in Costa Rica, so renting the boy apartment, 17-year-old, and he have the teenagers coming in and out. He shot one of them. He said the accident. And a week or so later, same thing happened. But those were Hispanics. And that'll go down softly. But if those are young men of color, man, that was front page. That was in the news cycle for a few days if that was going to be one of us. But it depends on who's reporting it. So we need to report our own story. We had Jet Magazine and Ebony, which was doing a fine job. But who do we have now? Black Enterprise. I don't even subscribe to BET because Johnson is going off his rockers.
Right.
But I'm finished.
Well, the good news on that is my hometown guy, LeBron James and Maverick Carter are getting ready to start a media company. So hopefully some of that will change. But, just addressing what you just said there, Tyrone, I think, getting back to what I was saying, we have to be responsible for ourselves. And one of the things that I've noticed is that when we do make it, we move out of our neighborhoods. That didn't happen before. My father's generation, my father didn't graduate from college. He went to college for 2 years and he was like, I'm going to go work in the rubber factory. I can get paid right now. But he did have friends that went on to complete their undergraduate degree and went on to be doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. And they all lived in the same community. They remained friends, so on and so forth. But that is what I have seen has changed with my generation. When we make it, we leave. We're out. We don't have to deal with that anymore. But if we stayed in the community, our communities would probably not be as bad as they are now.
Absolutely.
Because
that's one of the let-ups I was talking about. When we gain a little bit, we let up and we're going somewhere else. Right. But if we kept the pressure within ourselves, go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No.
Right.
So that gets back to what Tom was saying in terms of, I'm trying to think of the word that Thomas was using. Was it accountability or responsibility? We're not as responsible for ourselves as we used to be. And we need to be more responsible for ourselves. To me, that is what I see to be the main difference between, like I said, my father's generation and my generation. And in my children's generation. But I think that we're going to see a change. At least I hope. I hope we are.
Yeah.
I see a change also. I do see a change coming. But I think there's nothing to disagree with either of you gentlemen. But when I've always been asked this question, particularly from white people, and they ask, why do we have such issues in our community? And can you put your finger on one particular cause? I don't think it's that simple and easy. But if I had to take one prevalent cause, I would say it's probably teenage pregnancy. And I made a note to it before, is that if you look at what works in our institutions, work in our community and elsewhere are the strong institutions, whether that be the family structure first and foremost, then you typically have the church, you have schools, and then you have small businesses, and then you have professionals and the whole, right? Those institutions actually support and give you community. But when you start from the household itself, as I've always said, a child cannot raise a child. And typically when you have teenage pregnancy, you also have a one-parent household, typically. And if there's another adult there, it might be grandma, right? And so grandma typically is holding down the job and supporting both the teenage mother and the children. And a teenage mom typically does not have that teenage brother there with them. And you often have these children growing up without significant type of structure. And it's like when you go to a grocery store and you see some well-behaved children, the first thing you say is, hi, they must be some very good parents to teach those children how to be respectful and orderly. And then at the same time, you see some children running around, knocking over things, cursing out their mouth. They're only 5 years old. The first thing comes to your mind is, where the hell are the parents? What's happening? And I don't say this like the right-wing conservative crazy people say this about you must have personal responsibility kind of stuff, because I don't think at all that we're any less than anybody else. We're not less than anyone. But we do have pervasive issues in our community that are particular to our community. And it's not a circumstance to blame us for them, but you got to look at what the causation is. And if you think about it, Tyrone mentioned earlier about the consequences of slavery. Well, at that very moment, our family structure was destroyed. And we've been fighting and battling ever since to get our family structure back. When they told the black man, the black woman, we could not be together, and we could not have a family structure together, that has perpetuated itself throughout history. When they took the women and took the children and broke us up, and we had no family structure, that's perpetuated throughout history. To this day, if you don't have a strong family structure, everything else pretty much statistically has an extraordinarily hard chance to succeed. And so you talk about us gentlemen here. I know for my brother and I, we were the only people in our neighborhood who had a father that lived with us. And my dad was like a neighborhood dad. And my mother held down a job. That doesn't mean anything was special about them. It meant that my brother and I were fortunate, lucky enough that we had the parents we had. We're also fortunate, lucky enough that my mother and my father happened to get together so they could have that kind of family household. Now, the few friends I have who were in the hood like us had similar situations, had similar outcomes. We have other people who had absolutely, positively opposite outcomes. It doesn't mean that someone in a single family, teenage family household can't have a good outcome. It means that the odds are stacked against that little brother or sister. And then the construct of the institutions around them fail them often. You got some churches that are more concerned with money. You got schools more concerned with people taking vacations. You got police departments more concerned with pensions and knocking people over their heads, and so forth and so on. And the young people who grew up without a household they deserved are now called criminals when they become teenagers. And quite honestly, it's not their fault. I would never try to tell that 17-year-old, no matter how dastardly a crime he may have committed, that he's a failed individual, because I know he didn't come from significance institutionally to give him the opportunity to grow up the way he wants to grow up and should have grown up. You rarely ever see someone in a stable, financially adept household shooting up other households. You don't see them on the corner slinging drugs. You don't see them out there impregnating 4 or 5 young ladies, or young ladies having 4 or 5 kids. You don't see it typically. It's like a 99% circle opposite. Why? Because there's structure and there's institutionalization, and there's a pathway to success. And the opposite of that is what our communities are bereft in. And it's not a blame situation. We didn't perpetuate this upon ourselves. It's been given to us. And quite frankly, for the last 40 years, I think we did damn good to be where we are right now. If you think about it, if you truly think about the lineage, all of us right now are probably 4 generations away from being someone else's property, right? Your grandmother to your great-grandmother to the great-greats. 1865 wasn't that long ago, right? Someone actually owned you, owned us. We were less than shoes, and we've been given nothing since. The most successful project ever was Reconstruction, and that was too damn successful. They destroyed that in a minute.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you think about it, I don't ever put blame on us as a people or society or as a culture. I recognize the circumstances and I try to figure out where they came from. But we are no less than anyone. We are no less, in any facet. We're no less intelligent, no less dignified, orderly, or anything. But you give any person, any group of people, a set of circumstances, you can pretty much predict their outcome. It's not 100% exact, but the odds are there anywhere. And so I don't ever put the object of black on black crime as us being inferior, as us not being able to control ourselves or being too violent. No, I think that we're perpetuating a stereotype upon us when we do that. In reality, we've been given a set of odds. We're doing the best we can with them. And if anyone else outside our community owned up to them, we'll be better off.